The fluorescent hum of the stop and sip was Leo Martinez's constant companion, a flat, electric whisper that swallowed the silence of the highway night. Rain, cold and relentless, lashed against the plate glass windows, blurring the lonely stretch of asphalt into an impressionist painting of smeared light and shadow. Inside, under the unwavering glow, Leo moved with the practiced rhythm of a man trying to disappear into his routine. 3:34 a.m. Another shelf of lukewarm energy drinks, another row of dusty potato chip bags. He meticulously aligned them, each crisp packet facing forward, a small act of defiance against the endless, encroaching monotony. The air hung stale with the scent of stale coffee and disinfectant, a smell Leo knew better than his own home. He preferred it, in a way. It was predictable. It asked nothing of him. He was restocking the candy aisle when the chime above the door cut through the quiet. Leo flinched, a tiny, involuntary twitch of his shoulders. His heart did a small, frantic flutter. Just a customer, he reminded himself. No need for alarm. But the dread was a familiar guest, always perched on the edge of his awareness, waiting for an invitation. A man shuffled in, a walking storm of grumbles and cheap cologne. He was a regular, the kind who came in every night for a single lukewarm beer and a scratch-off ticket, always complaining about the price, the weather, the government, Leo. Tonight, his usual tirade was sharper, fueled by whatever misery had boiled over in his life. "You still here, kid?" the man snarled, his eyes bloodshot. "Don't you ever get a real job?" Leo's breath hitched. He kept his head down, focused on arranging a pyramid of chocolate bars. Just working, sir," he mumbled, his voice a threadbare whisper. He felt the heat rise in his cheeks, a familiar flush of shame and fear. He could feel the man's eyes on him, a weight. He could hear the heavy thud of his own pulse in his ears. Years ago, the man's words would have stung, maybe even sparked a flicker of indignation. But now, they just echoed a truth Leo already accepted. He was invisible. He was a nobody. And that, in its own way, was a kind of safety. It was certainly safer than the alternative. The memory was a sudden, sharp intake of breath. The schoolyard, the taunts, the shove. His own voice, a choked, desperate protest, too weak to be heard above the laughter. The sting of tears, the helpless anger, bubbling up, immediately swallowed by the shame of not being able to fight back. Better to just disappear. Better to never make a sound. He heard the man drop the beer on the counter, the clatter jarring in the quiet store. "What's the damage then?" Leo scurried to the register, hands trembling slightly as he scanned the bottle. $3.25, sir." He avoided eye contact, his gaze fixed on the stained countertop. The man slapped down a $10 bill, then lingered, his eyes narrowed as if expecting a fight. Leo counted out the change, his fingers fumbling with the coins. He just needed him to leave, to disappear back into the rain. Finally, with a grunt, the man snatched his change in the beer, kicking the door open and letting in a blast of cold, wet air before it slammed shut behind him. Leo exhaled, a long, shaky breath. He leaned against the counter for a moment, letting the tremors in his hands subside. The quiet returned, heavier now, punctuated only by the drumming of the rain. He looked at the $20 bill tucked under the corner of the register drawer. It wasn't much, but it was enough to cover the late fee on his rent, if he stretched it. His hand darted out, quick and practiced, sweeping the bill from beneath the drawer and tucking it into his pocket. It was a secret he kept, a small rebellion against the endless grinding of his life, a tiny assurance against the creeping fear of homelessness. Just a loan, he always told himself, from the faceless corporation. He'd put it back, someday. A sudden, violent crash from the back of the store shattered the fragile piece. Leo froze, his hand still in his pocket. He didn't dare breathe. The sound of splintering wood followed by a grunt of pain. Then, silence. A ringing, terrifying silence that hummed louder than the fluorescent lights. His heart hammered against his ribs. He wanted to run, to hide, to simply cease to exist. But his feet were rooted to the spot. His eyes, wide and terrified, darted toward the stockroom door, now ajar, a sliver of darkness visible within. Then, a figure stumbled out. He was a man, mid-30s, his clothes torn and soaked, slick with something dark that wasn't just rain, blood. It matted his hair, dripped from his chin, stained his shirt in gruesome patterns. His breath came in ragged, desperate gasps. He moved like a broken doll, every step a painful struggle, eyes darting wildly around the store. "Lock it!" the man croaked, his voice raw and broken, barely a whisper. He stumbled past Leo, bumping against a display of cheap umbrellas, sending them clattering. He fumbled with the deadbolt on the front door, his bloodied fingers slipping on the metal. Finally, with a desperate click, he secured it. His back pressed against the glass, eyes fixed on the empty highway, as if expecting something to materialize out of the rain-swept darkness. "Don't believe them," he gasped, turning to Leo, his eyes wide and pleading. "When they get here, don't believe them. They're not security. They're the ones who made me do it, to my family." His voice cracked on the last words, choked with unspeakable horror. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his stomach, his bloodied hand clamping over a jagged tear in his shirt. A dark, rapidly expanding stain spread across the fabric. Leo could only stare, his mind reeling. "What? Made you do what? Your family?" The words were a jumble, a nightmare made real in the sterile glow of the convenience store. His ingrained terror of confrontation warred with a primal instinct to help, to understand. But fear won. It always did. Before Leo could stammer out a single coherent word, the man, David, struggled to his feet. "They're coming. I heard them. You have to hide me. Please, they'll kill us both." He staggered toward the stockroom again, pushing past Leo without a glance. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving a trail of crimson droplets on the linoleum. Leo stood paralyzed, his breath caught in his throat. He could hear David's ragged breathing from the back, interspersed with pained whimpers. His mind screamed for action, any action, but his body wouldn't respond. The front door was locked. David was bleeding, hiding, and someone was coming. Just as the thought solidified into a paralyzing dread, two sets of headlights cut through the rain, pulling into the parking lot. Not a police cruiser, a sleek black sedan, the kind that screamed government or corporation. It glided to a stop directly in front of the store, its engine humming with an almost predatory purr. Two figures emerged from the car, moving with an unnerving, synchronized grace. A man, tall and lean, with eyes that seemed to absorb all light, and a woman, elegant even in the driving rain, her gaze sharp and dissecting. They moved with an air of absolute authority, of quiet, unshakable power. They didn't even glance at the locked door. They simply approached it, and without a word, the man, Silas, raised a hand and rapped sharply on the glass. Rap, rap, rap. Each knock was a hammer blow against Leo's already shattered nerves. David's words echoed in his head. "Don't believe them. They're not security. They're the ones who made me do it." Leo's eyes darted from the stockroom, where a dying man huddled, to the unblinking faces at the door. He was trapped, caught in a nightmare he couldn't comprehend. The rain outside seemed to amplify the silence in the store, making the gap between each knock feel like an eternity. He had to make a choice that went against every fiber of his being, against his fundamental need to be invisible, to avoid conflict. But the terror in David's eyes, the blood on the floor, it felt real, too real. Taking a shuddering breath, Leo forced himself to move. He walked to the door, his steps heavy, his gaze fixed on the lock. He could feel their eyes on him, studying him, dissecting him. Silas's face was utterly devoid of emotion, a blank canvas of professional calm. Mara, the woman, offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. It didn't reach her eyes. Leo unlatched the lock, the click sounding impossibly loud in the tense quiet. He pulled the door open just enough to create a gap, bracing himself. Silas stepped inside, followed by Mara, bringing with them a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. They were immaculately dressed, not a single drop of water clinging to their expensive suits. They looked entirely out of place in the grimy stop-and-sip, like predators in a sheep pen. Silas's voice was smooth, deep, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Good evening. We apologize for the intrusion, especially at such a late hour." His eyes swept over Leo, a gaze that felt like a physical probe. "We're looking for a customer. He's causing a bit of trouble for us. Did you happen to see anyone matching this description?" He held up a tablet, the screen displaying a clear, professional photo of David. A David who was clean, smiling, utterly unlike the bleeding wreck hiding in Leo's stockroom. Leo's mouth was dry. His tongue felt like sandpaper. He could feel the lie forming on his lips, a desperate, pathetic attempt to protect a man he knew nothing about from people who radiated danger. "No," Leo stammered, his voice cracking. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to meet Silas's gaze, though it felt like looking into the abyss. "No, sir. Just the regular customer, for his beer." He gestured vaguely at the empty space where the grumpy man had been. Mara's smile widened, a thin, unnerving crescent. "A regular customer, you say? At this hour?" Her voice was soft, melodic, but it held the razor-sharp edge of a question that wasn't really a question. "Yes, he comes every night," Leo insisted, his lie taking on a life of its own, dragging him further and further into uncharted territory. His heart pounded. He could feel the sweat prickling at his hairline. Silas lowered the tablet, his expression unchanged. "I see." His eyes drifted past Leo, toward the closed door of the stockroom. Leo felt a cold dread spread through him. Did he know? Could he sense it? "We've been tracking this individual for some time. He's quite unstable, a danger to himself and, unfortunately, to others." Mara stepped closer, her scent expensive and unsettling. "We have reason to believe he might have entered this establishment. Perhaps you missed him. He's quite good at blending in when he wants to." Her eyes, a startling shade of pale blue, were fixed on Leo's. She paused, then added, "It would be in your best interest to be truthful with us, Mr. Martinez. We're simply here to ensure the safety of everyone involved." The casual use of his name, spoken with such quiet confidence, sent a jolt of pure terror through Leo. They knew him. They knew him. How? And what did they mean, safety? David's words screamed through his mind. "They're the ones who made me do it to my family. I haven't seen anyone. Leo insisted, his voice barely audible. He clasped his hands together, trying to stop their trembling. Just me here, all night. Silas studied him for a long, agonizing moment. Very well. He walked directly to the counter, his movements economical and precise. His hand reached out and picked up Leo's cell phone, which Leo had left charging beside the register. "We'll just need to use your phone, if you don't mind. A quick call to confirm a few details." Leo watched, horrified, as Silas's fingers expertly deactivated the phone's cellular signal, then powered it down. "And the landline, if you have one." Leo gestured weakly to the old corded phone in the back office. It's been out for a while, static." It wasn't true. It worked perfectly. But the lie felt like a fragile shield, offering a momentary reprieve. Mara, meanwhile, had moved to the security monitors above the counter. Her fingers danced over the controls, pulling up the feeds, then, with a soft click, plunging the screens into static. Old equipment, always a challenge. She turned, a perfectly pleasant smile on her face. "Wouldn't want any misunderstandings or false reports, would we, Mr. Martinez? Especially with a situation as delicate as this." The air in the store thickened, becoming oppressive. Leo felt the walls closing in. No phone, no cameras, no way out. He was completely cut off, trapped with these two unsettling individuals and the bleeding man in the back. The thought sent a cold shiver down his spine. They hadn't forced him. They hadn't threatened him with overt violence, but they had taken everything, quietly, methodically, and without a single raised voice. "Now, Mr. Martinez," Silas said, his voice softer now, almost conversational, "let's talk about your little side income." Leo's blood ran cold. He felt a sudden sickening drop in his stomach. The $20 bill, the one in his pocket. He hadn't even realized he was clutching it. Silas smiled, a thin, humorless curve of his lips. "That $20 bill you just pocketed from the till, for example. Small change, certainly, but indicative, wouldn't you say, of certain habits, certain pressures." Leo felt his face flush scarlet, his carefully guarded secret exposed. They knew everything. He imagined the security cameras, the hidden microphones, the unseen eyes that must have been watching him for weeks, months. The realization was more terrifying than any direct threat. Just a loan," Leo stammered, his voice barely a squeak. "I was going to put it back." "Of course you were," Mara said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "We understand, Leo. Life is hard. Sometimes you have to make difficult choices to protect what's important." She took a step closer, her eyes gleaming. "Do you have family, Leo? A mother, perhaps? Anyone who might be affected by your choices?" The veiled threat hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Leo felt a surge of nausea. His mother, frail, living alone, dependent on his meager contributions. He pictured her face, the lines of worry etched around her eyes. He felt a desperate, primal urge to protect her, to keep her out of this. He looked from Silas's impassive face to Mara's chilling smile. They weren't looking for David. They were here for him, for his choices. Suddenly, the store door chimed again. All three of them froze. A large, burly man in a police uniform stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his hat. Officer Benning, a familiar face. He came in most nights for coffee and a Danish, often exchanging a few gruff but kind words with Leo. He was a beacon, a lifeline. "Evening, Leo," Benning said, his voice booming slightly in the suddenly silent store. He took off his hat, shaking the water from it. His gaze swept over Silas and Mara, pausing on their pristine suits. "Everything all right here? You folks having some trouble?" Hope surged through Leo, a hot, dizzying rush. He could tell Benning, he could explain, he could be saved. This was it. "Officer," Leo began, his voice cracking with urgency, his eyes pleading with Benning. There's a situation." He tried to gesture subtly toward the stockroom, to signal the danger, to convey the unspoken horror of the past few minutes. But Silas moved with lightning speed, stepping smoothly between Leo and Benning, his hand resting casually on Leo's shoulder. It wasn't a grip, but a gentle pressure that conveyed absolute control. "Officer Benning, I presume?" Silas's voice was warm, charming, utterly devoid of the menace he'd shown Leo. "Silas Thorne, with Sentinel Security, and this is my colleague Mara." He offered a hand to Benning, a practiced, confident handshake. Benning's brows furrowed. He glanced at Leo, whose eyes were wide with a desperate, frantic warning. "Sentinel Security? Never heard of you folks around here. What kind of incident?" "A rather sensitive corporate matter, I'm afraid," Mara interjected, her voice smooth as silk. "An internal issue with a former employee. Nothing for the local authorities to worry about, officer. We're simply retrieving some proprietary materials." She offered Benning a dazzling professional smile. "Mr. Martinez, bless his heart, is a little jumpy. He's been working the graveyard shift for quite some time, hasn't he? Can be a bit isolating." Silas chuckled, a low, reassuring sound. His hand tightened imperceptibly on Leo's shoulder. "He's quite dedicated. A bit overprotective of his store, perhaps. We just explained that we're authorized to be here, but I think the late hour has him a little on edge." He turned to Leo, his eyes momentarily flicking to the bloodstain on the floor near the stockroom door, then back to Leo's face, a silent warning. "Isn't that right, Leo? Just a bit of a misunderstanding." Leo's mind reeled. Silas had expertly spun a narrative, twisting Leo's frantic fear into mere exhaustion and paranoia. He saw the doubt in Benning's eyes, the way he was looking at Leo now, not as a victim, but as someone who was, perhaps, unraveling. He wanted to scream, to tell Benning everything, but Silas's hand was a vice on his shoulder, a silent promise of swift retribution. And Mara's gaze was a chilling reminder of his mother, of the consequences. He had made his choice when he lied. Now he had to stick to it. "Yes," Leo choked out, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked at Benning, then down at his feet, unable to meet the officer's gaze. Just a misunderstanding. I'm fine. Everything's fine." Benning studied him for another moment, his expression unreadable. He glanced between Silas and Mara, then back to Leo. He didn't look convinced, but he also didn't look like he believed Leo was in any real danger. He simply sighed, a sound of weary resignation. "All right then," Benning said, pulling out his wallet. "Coffee and a maple Danish, Leo." Leo, moving on autopilot, poured Benning his coffee and bagged the Danish. His hands shook as he took the money, his eyes fixed on the cheap plastic wrapper. He could feel Silas's and Mara's satisfied gazes on him, a silent celebration of their victory. Benning took his coffee in Danish. "You get some rest, Leo. You look like you've seen a ghost." He gave a small, apologetic nod to Silas and Mara. "Sorry to interrupt your proprietary retrieval." With that, Officer Benning, Leo's only hope, walked out of the store, the chime above the door sounding like a death knell. He got back in his patrol car and drove off, leaving Leo utterly alone, utterly despairing. The silence that descended after Benning left was heavy, suffocating. Leo felt a sob building in his throat, but he swallowed it down, forcing himself to remain impassive. Silas removed his hand from Leo's shoulder. "Excellent, Leo. You performed admirably. A perfectly believable display of distress." He smiled, a genuine, if cruel, smile this time. "See, it's not so hard to make the right choices when the stakes are clear." Mara stepped forward, her voice soft but with an undercurrent of steel. "Now, about our fugitive. I believe he's still with us, isn't he?" Her gaze was locked on the stockroom door, a silent, terrifying accusation. Just then, a faint scraping sound came from behind the stockroom door, followed by a muffled thud. David, he was moving. Leo's eyes darted to the door, then to Silas and Mara, a fresh wave of panic washing over him. He was trapped. David was in there, bleeding, claiming to be a victim. But these two, they were pure, distilled menace. Before anyone could react, the stockroom door suddenly burst open. David stumbled out, no longer trying to hide. He moved with a desperate, wild energy, a jagged shard of metal from a broken shelf clutched in his bloodied hand. His eyes were wide, frenzied, fixed not on Silas and Mara, but on Leo. "You!" David shrieked, his voice raw with a sudden, terrifying rage. He lunged forward, grabbing Leo by the collar, the sharp edge of the metal shard pressing against Leo's neck. "You lied to them. You betrayed me!" Leo gasped, the cold metal against his skin, a sudden, horrifying reality. He could feel a thin trickle of warmth, of blood beginning to seep from his neck. Silas and Mara watched, unmoving, their expressions unreadable. Almost interested. "No, I didn't," Leo whimpered, utterly terrified, his eyes wide as saucers. "I didn't say anything. I covered for you." "He's lying," David screamed, pulling Leo closer, his breath hot and ragged against Leo's ear. "They know. They always know. And now you're going to help me get out of here, or I'll gut you right here." He pressed the metal shard harder. Leo felt a sharp sting. Now, David," Silas said, his voice calm, almost bored. "Let's not be so dramatic. He chose his side, didn't he? Just like you chose yours." David's head snapped toward Silas, his eyes burning with a manic fury. "I chose to save them. I chose to give them peace. You don't understand. They would have been worse off with your game, your sick, twisted game." He turned back to Leo, his grip tightening, the shard digging deeper. "You want to know what they do? They take everything. They strip you down. They make you watch. You think I wanted to do it? To my family? To my beautiful wife? To my children?" His voice broke, a raw, primal wail of agony and madness. "I did it. I ended it. To save them from you." Leo froze, every muscle in his body rigid with horror. The words echoed in the small, fluorescent-lit store. "I did it. To my family." David, the victim, the bleeding man who begged for protection, had just confessed. He was a killer, a confessed killer who now held Leo hostage, threatening to add him to his growing list of victims. The world tilted on its axis. The clear line between good and evil, victim and monster, evaporated into a terrifying gray. Leo was no longer caught between two distinct forces. He was trapped between a confessed, paranoid murderer and the cold, calculating hunters who had engineered this entire nightmare. And in that moment, he realized something even more terrifying. Silas and Mara weren't just hunting David, they were hunting him. This entire night, this entire elaborate charade, it was all for him. He was the prey. David's words hung in the air, a grotesque echo in the bright, sterile store. I did it. To my family, to save them from you. The blood on his hands wasn't just from a struggle. It was from an act of unspeakable horror, twisted into a desperate plea for salvation. Leo felt the cold metal against his neck, the thin line of warmth seeping, a grim promise. This wasn't just a simple robbery or a hiding fugitive. This was a deeper, more profound darkness. Silas and Mara watched, their faces unmoved, almost clinical. There was no shock, no anger, only an evaluation. It was as if David's horrific confession was just another data point in their grand experiment. "You don't understand!" David shrieked again, his eyes wide and unseeing, staring past Leo at the two figures by the door. "They were going to turn them into puppets, make them play. I saw what they did to the others. They would have broken them piece by piece. I loved them too much to let that happen." His grip on Leo tightened, the shard pressing harder, Leo whimpering, tasting metallic fear. Mara finally spoke, her voice still unnervingly calm, a serpent's hiss. "Such a shame, David. Such wasted potential. You were so close to breaking the cycle, weren't you? To playing the game differently." She took a step forward, her expensive shoes silent on the linoleum. But some people simply prefer to burn their bridges rather than cross them. Silas tilted his head slightly. "And now you've involved poor Leo here, haven't you? Dragged him into your mess. Another variable, another test of character." His gaze flickered to Leo, then back to David, a subtle shift in focus. "Tell me, David, do you think he has the stomach for this? To survive you or us?" The implicit threat, the casual way they spoke of Leo's survival as a mere hypothesis, sent a fresh wave of terror through him. He was a piece on their board, David was a piece, and they were the players. And the game, whatever it was, had just escalated. David, however, was past reason. He was trapped in his own hell, a private torment that had spilled out into the convenience store. "He's with you," David accused, shaking Leo violently. "He lied for you. He wants to see me caught, just like you want to see me suffer." "I didn't lie for them," Leo cried out, desperation cracking his voice. "I lied for you, because you said they were going to kill us." He felt a new surge of anger, brief and quickly swallowed by fear, but it was there. He had protected David, and now David was turning on him. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. Mara chuckled, a low, throaty sound that was anything but humorous. "Oh, Leo, such a sweet, innocent soul. Always trying to avoid conflict. Always trying to please everyone. But in this game, Leo, there are no innocent bystanders, only players. And you, my dear, have chosen to play." Silas stepped fully into the store, moving with deliberate slowness towards David. "Let him go, David. There's no need to harm him. He's of no consequence to your escape. We're simply here to observe, to see how far you're willing to go." David snarled, pulling Leo back towards the stockroom, dragging him through the trail of his own blood. "You'll never get me back. I'd rather die. I'd rather take him with me." The stockroom, a familiar space of stacked boxes and forgotten inventory, now felt like a death trap. David's frantic energy was infectious, and Leo felt his own panic rising. He was a shield, a hostage, a tool in David's delusional escape plan. And out in the main store, Silas and Mara watched, patiently, like scientists observing a lab experiment. Leo caught a glimpse of himself in the reflective surface of a soda cooler, blood on his neck, eyes wide with horror, a desperate, pathetic figure. The meek, timid clerk, now a human sacrifice in a stranger's madness. His ingrained terror of confrontation, his avoidance of conflict, had led him directly to this precipice. It was a terrifying realization. He remembered another time, younger, foolish. He'd seen a man struggling, a petty theft, nothing violent, but the shopkeeper was yelling, frantic. Leo had frozen, hidden behind an aisle, heart pounding, too afraid to step forward, too afraid to call for help. Later, he'd felt a pang of guilt, a shame that festered. He could have done something, but he hadn't. He just watched. Just like Silas and Mara were watching now. The cold metal pressed deeper as David stumbled, dragging Leo into a cramped space between towering shelves of canned goods and industrial cleaning supplies. The air here was heavy with the scent of dust and floor wax. David's breathing was ragged, his grip weakening. He was losing blood, fading. "The back door," David rasped, pushing Leo ahead of him. "There has to be a back door. We can get out through there." His voice was laced with a desperate hope that Leo knew was utterly futile. Silas and Mara would have accounted for every exit. But then, a flicker of light from the parking lot. Headlights. Another car. David froze, his head snapping up. "No, they're here. They sent more," he whimpered, a broken sound. He tightened his grip on Leo, pulling him behind a stack of toilet paper bales. Leo's heart leaped. Benning! It had to be Benning. He'd come back. He'd seen something. He knew. This was it. The real cavalry. Hope, bright and searing, flared in Leo's chest, almost blinding him to the blood and the blade at his throat. The chimes above the front door sang again, a cruel, mocking sound. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, too familiar. "Leo, everything all right in here?" Officer Benning's voice, a familiar rumble, cut through the tense quiet. But this time, it held a different timbre. Not concerned, not worried, almost knowing. David went rigid. "It's him! It's one of them!" He pushed Leo deeper into the shadows, the metal shard digging into Leo's flesh. "He's a wolf in sheep's clothing. They're all wolves!" Leo, however, was focused entirely on Benning. He saw him emerge from the main part of the store, walking slowly, deliberately towards the stockroom door. His hand wasn't on his weapon. His face was devoid of the gruff kindness Leo had come to expect. Instead, it was grim, resolute. Benning stopped at the threshold of the stockroom, his eyes scanning the cluttered aisles, not in search of a perpetrator, but as if looking for a specific scene. He saw Leo pressed against the toilet paper, David's bloody hand clamped around his neck. He saw Silas and Mara now standing casually near the candy aisle, watching. Benning sighed, a weary sound. "David, we both know how this ends. You were never going to get away." David's laugh was a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "You lie! You're all liars! You play your games with people's lives, you break them, and then you call it justice." Benning ignored David, his gaze settling on Leo, an unsettling pity in his eyes. "Leo, I'm sorry you got caught up in this, truly." Leo's hope, which had burned so fiercely moments ago, began to flicker, then die. The words weren't an apology for a misunderstanding. They were an apology for a sacrifice.
"Benning," Silas's voice cut in, smooth as ever. "Perfect timing. Our subject seems to be deteriorating. Perhaps a little assistance with the final phase?" Benning nodded, a stark, terrifying confirmation of David's raving. He wasn't a rescuer. He was part of the trap. He was the final piece of the puzzle, revealing the full, horrifying picture. Leo's breath hitched. He stared at Benning, the man who brought him coffee, the man who offered gruff words of comfort, the man who was now complicit in this monstrous charade. The betrayal was a physical blow, worse than David's blade. It shattered his last shred of trust, his last belief that there was an outside world of decency and order. Benning stepped into the stockroom, his presence filling the cramped space, making it even more suffocating. "There's no escape, David. There never was. This was always about the other players." He looked directly at Leo. "About you, Leo." The statement hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Leo's world, already turned upside down, now spun wildly out of control. What? What is this?" Leo whispered, his voice trembling, barely audible. "What are you talking about?" Benning looked at Silas, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Benning then turned back to Leo, his face etched with a grim, practiced detachment. "It's a test, Leo," Benning explained, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "An observation. The St. Jude standard, we call it. A measure of resilience, of moral fiber under extreme duress. You see, Mr. Martinez, there are certain individuals in the world, very wealthy, very influential, who believe humanity has grown soft, complacent. They sponsor these experiences to understand the true nature of man when pushed to the absolute breaking point." Mara's voice drifted in from the main store, almost poetic. "A crucible, Leo. You are the gold, and this night, you're fire." Leo felt a cold sweat break out all over his body. This was beyond anything he could have imagined. He wasn't just a victim, he was an exhibit. His pain, his fear, his choices, all entertainment for unseen, monstrous patrons. "My family," David choked out, a fresh wave of tears and madness on his face. "You did this to them. You made me choose." "Your choices were your own, David," Silas stated, his voice flat. "We merely presented the parameters, just as we presented them to Leo, to lie or not to lie, to help or to betray, to fight or to surrender." He paused, then added, "It's quite fascinating, isn't it, Leo, how quickly a man's true nature is revealed when everything he holds dear is at stake." Leo stared at them. Silas, Mara, the cold architects, Benning, the trusted local officer, revealed as a complicit guard, and David, the deranged murderer, now making horrific sense in his madness. He wasn't the victim. He was the prior subject, a broken test subject. The reality crashed down on Leo with the force of a physical blow. There was no escaping this. No one was coming to save him. He was alone, utterly and completely alone, facing a meticulously orchestrated torment designed to strip him bare. The fear was still there, but beneath it, a new feeling began to stir.
a cold, hard knot of something he hadn't felt in years. Resentment, rage. His breath, though still ragged, began to steady. His eyes, though still wide, took on a different glint. He looked at the blade at his neck, then at David's weakening grip. He looked at the faces of his tormentors. They wanted a show. They wanted him to break. But he had spent his entire life breaking. He had spent his life being invisible, avoiding, running. He had let every conflict wash over him, every slight define him. And it had led him here, to this moment, with a madman's blade at his throat and 3 calmly smiling predators observing his demise. No more. A sudden, sharp movement. Leo twisted, using the last of David's fading strength against him. He slammed his elbow back hard into David's ribs. David grunted, momentarily loosening his grip as he gasped for air. It was a fleeting opportunity. Leo snatched it. With a surge of adrenaline, he wrenched free, pushing David violently away. The metal shard scraped his neck again, deeper this time, a searing pain, but he was free. David stumbled back, clutching his side, his eyes still wide and furious, but now mixed with confusion. You traitor! Leo didn't respond. He backed away, his gaze sweeping around the stockroom. The stacks of boxes, the overfilled shelves, the familiar clutter that he meticulously organized every night. He knew this place. Every faulty outlet, every leaky pipe, every hidden corner. This store, which had been his prison, was now his weapon. Silas chuckled, a low, appreciative sound. Ah, a spark, finally. Perhaps our subject isn't as docile as we initially assessed. Mara's smile broadened. Let's see if it's a flash in the pan or a true inferno, Silas. Benning, however, watched Leo with a more serious expression. He wasn't amused. He seemed to recognize a shift, a dangerous flicker in Leo's eyes. Leo ignored them all. His mind was racing, connecting details he usually just observed passively. The old gas heater in the corner, always a little finicky, smelling faintly of propane. The stack of highly flammable degreasing agents near the mop sink. The frayed electrical cord for the old coffee machine he'd moved back here last week. All the small, ignored dangers of his mundane existence now coming into sharp focus as potential tools of destruction. He moved with a newfound purpose, no longer timid, no longer hesitant. He sidestepped David, who was still trying to regain his footing, weakened by blood loss. Leo darted to the gas heater, his fingers flying over the rusted controls. A quick twist, a decisive yank. The scent of propane, previously faint, now grew stronger, thicker, filling the air.
"What is he doing?" Benning growled, taking a step forward, his hand finally going to his holster. The game had clearly shifted beyond simple observation. "He's getting creative," Silas said, a hint of genuine curiosity in his voice. "Let's see if he can follow through." Leo didn't waste time arguing or explaining. He pulled a box of paper towels from a shelf, tearing off several sheets. He grabbed a bottle of industrial-strength degreaser, its label warning of extreme flammability. He saturated the paper towels, then began to arrange them, quickly, deliberately, around the base of the leaky propane heater. "Leo, stop this instant!" Mara commanded, her voice losing its silky edge, a hint of genuine alarm finally creeping in. "This is not how this test concludes." "You don't get to decide that anymore," Leo yelled back, his voice raw, hoarse, but strong. It was the first time he had truly raised his voice, and the sound of it, unfamiliar and powerful, was exhilarating.
He then moved to the old, neglected coffee machine in the corner, its frayed cord leading to a loose, sparking outlet he'd meant to report for weeks. He knew the wiring was ancient, susceptible to overload. A quick, desperate thought flashed through his mind. If he could short it out, create a spark. David, still dazed, stumbled towards him. "What are you doing? You're going to kill us all!" "Maybe," Leo panted, his hands working furiously, "but I'm not letting you decide how I die." He tore off another section of paper towels, soaking it with degreaser, and shoved it directly into the sparking outlet. A crackle, a flash of blue light, then a puff of acrid smoke. The smell of burning plastic mixed with the overwhelming stench of propane. "He's lighting the place!" Benning shouted, finally drawing his weapon. Silas and Mara exchanged a look of cold, calculating assessment. This wasn't part of their script. This was improvisation. The small spark, fed by the soaked paper, caught, then blossomed into a small, hungry flame. It licked at the degreaser-soaked towels around the heater. The propane in the air, already thick, found its source. A low hiss, then a sudden, deafening whoosh. The entire stockroom erupted in a blinding flash of orange and yellow. A shock wave of heat slammed into Leo, throwing him backwards against a shelf, sending cans and boxes raining down on him. The roar of the fire was instantaneous, all-consuming. Smoke, black and acrid, billowed out into the main store. The fluorescent lights flickered wildly, then died, plunging the convenience store into a hellish twilight illuminated only by the inferno raging in the back. Chaos, pure, unadulterated chaos. Silas and Mara, for the first time, looked genuinely surprised, almost horrified. Benning, caught off guard, stumbled, his weapon clattering to the floor. David, screaming, was swallowed by the flames. Leo, battered and bleeding, pushed himself up, adrenaline coursing through him. He couldn't breathe. The smoke was thick, burning his lungs, stinging his eyes. But he could see. He could move. And he could feel. He felt the fear, yes, but he also felt a strange, fierce exhilaration. He had done this. He, the timid, inconsequential clerk, had just taken control of his own ending. He stumbled through the choking smoke, past the burning shelves, ignoring the shouts and curses of Silas and Mara, who were now struggling to contend with the inferno he had unleashed. They were no longer calm observers. They were trapped. He burst into the main store, the smoke rapidly filling the entire space. He could hear their frantic calls, their attempts to orient themselves in the sudden darkness and chaos. "The front door! Get the front door open!" Silas's voice raw with panic. But Leo knew better. The deadbolt, which David had locked, was still secure. And Leo had the key, tucked away in his pocket, a nervous habit. He had nowhere to go but out, but he would make sure they stayed in. He pushed past the counter, his hands reaching for the key. His fingers fumbled, slick with sweat and grime. He could hear the crackle of the fire growing louder, consuming the stockroom. "Leo, open the door!" Mara screamed, her voice shrill with genuine fear now. He ignored her, his eyes fixed on the lock. He found the key, cold metal against his burning fingers. He inserted it, twisted, and the deadbolt clunked open. The front door. Freedom. But he wouldn't just walk out. Not yet. He saw the heavy metal newspaper rack, usually chained to the wall. He'd noticed the chain was loose yesterday. Another detail of his mundane existence, suddenly vital. With a desperate heave, he pulled the rack free, dragging it to the door. He glanced back. Silas and Mara were struggling through the smoke, coughing, their pristine suits singed, their faces contorted in furious disbelief. Benning was nowhere to be seen, likely consumed by the initial blast or trapped further back. David was gone, obliterated by the fire he had ironically tried to escape. Leo looked at the chain on the newspaper rack, then at the door handle. He could secure it, trap them, turn their cage into their tomb. He fumbled with the chain, his hands clumsy, the smoke making him dizzy. He wrapped it around the door handle, then around the heavy metal frame of the rack, securing it with a desperate, shaky knot. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would hold long enough. Long enough for what? Long enough for him to escape. Long enough for the sirens. He had heard them in the distance, a faint, growing wail over the roar of the fire, the sound of real help, or perhaps just the sound of the end of his nightmare. With a final desperate tug on the chain, ensuring it was as secure as his shaking hands could make it, Leo turned and lunged for the shattered display window where David had first burst in. The glass was already gone, leaving a jagged, gaping hole. He scrambled through, tearing his clothes, skinning his arms and legs on the sharp edges, barely feeling the pain. He landed hard on the wet asphalt outside, coughing, gagging, sucking in lungfuls of cold, clean, rain-soaked air. The stop and sip, his mundane prison, was a raging inferno behind him. Flames licked at the ceiling, orange light dancing in the rain. Smoke billowed into the night sky, a dark, churning column against the relentless downpour. He lay there, curled on the asphalt, battered, bleeding, gasping for breath. The roar of the fire in his ears, the rain washing over his face, mixing with tears and ash. He looked back at the burning store, then up at the flashing red and blue lights now visible in the distance, growing closer, their sirens wailing their approach. Leo Martinez was no longer the timid clerk who meticulously stacked energy drinks. He was a survivor. He had been pushed to his absolute breaking point, forced to confront the darkest aspects of humanity, and in doing so, had found something within himself he never knew existed. A capacity for violence, yes, but also a defiant, terrifying will to live. He was alive. He had chosen. He had fought. And he had won in the most brutal, devastating way possible. But the cost was everything. The blood on his hands, the screams in his ears, the images of David's madness and Silas's cruel amusement, they would never leave him. The scars on his body would fade, but the scars on his soul would remain. A permanent record of the night he became part of the game, and then burned it all down. He looked down at his bloodied, trembling hands. He had survived, but he was irrevocably changed. The St. Jude standard had found its answer, and it was a terrifying one. The sirens screamed closer, cutting through the rain and the roar of the fire, signaling the end of one nightmare and the beginning of another. Leo pushed himself up, his body aching, his mind reeling. He walked slowly, painfully, away from the burning store, into the approaching lights, a ghost emerging from the flames, forever marked by the choices he had made in the crucible of that rain-soaked night.